Happy
What
Saturday.
up?
It is
Happy
What
Saturday.
is the date and
Saturday,
time?
October 26th at 9
Whew.
a.m. It's almost Halloween. I almost said Christmas. It's almost Halloween.
You know what though?
Almost
Because they put
Christmas
all
too.
they put the
I
Christmas
know.
crap out so
Dude, I've already
early, dude.
seen it. Yeah.
Dude, it was out in September. It's
Dude,
like
I went to
nuts.
Target yesterday and I don't know if you've been to Target in a while, but they have like the Christmas pajamas they put out already out, man. I
Yeah,
was like,
hmm
dude.
dude, Halloween is
And
not
the
even
ugly
passed
Christmas
yet.
sweaters. That's
Oh
Yeah,
God.
exactly. Yep. All those. I'll be
But they put it
buying one
out
of
so they
those.
put it out so early.
yeah.
They do, and it's like
Yeah.
it makes it. I don't know. It's confusing too with time. I don't know.
Yeah.
It makes
Yeah,
everything.
great Christmas movie if you guys haven't seen it yet is Daddy's Home and Daddy's Home 2 with Will
Okay.
Ferrell and Mark Wahlberg.
I'll have to
They're
check
like
those
laugh
out.
out loud Christmas movies.
All right.
I
Holy
love stuff
cow.
like that.
Yeah.
I was looking forward to Elf. That's
I
like a
like Elf. Elf
classic.
is a good
Also a good
one.
one.
Yeah,
But
Yeah.
these are newer. Even has is it Mel Gibson? Yeah, Mel Gibson in it. Holy cow.
yeah.
Wow. He's pretty
hmm
old now. Anyway, good morning, everybody. I hope you're all having a good Saturday. Yeah, we got a pretty exciting episode today, talking about some of the updates to Next.js. So if you guys are,
Yeah, what's next?
yeah, what's next with Next? That's our episode. Um,
Probably why he named it next.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. They even did a joke in the, so I don't know if you guys know, Randall was, his internet was not working, but Danny, myself, and some of the web dev incubator members, um, had like a little watch party this week. It was open to the whole group, but it was kind of just a small group because I think it was in the middle of the day while a lot of people were at their actual
Yeah.
jobs and could not attend. But we had a little watch party. We watched the Nextjs Conference where they revealed some of the new features. And they also had some really interesting talks from different people who were implementing Nextjs, like the New York Public Library and Peloton and a bunch of companies that already are using Next. And
Yeah.
it was a
We're
really,
transitioning over to it, and that process is
yeah,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, it was very interesting. So it was a great conference in my opinion. And today we wanted to just outline some of the changes that are coming for Next or really available right now, what those changes mean for you, and give you an idea of like what it means to code in Next and why it's so important to start, taking on this technology because we talk about this a lot. Something that I talk to a lot of our students about. Um, but a lot of people get stuck in this sort of like loop of learning HTML, CSS, and JavaScript without ever moving on to a JavaScript framework. And while it's great
Ooh.
to learn the foundations,
Well,
oh, okay, I got some
Do
hands
you do
raised.
you remember what that was like? Because I clearly remember what it was like hearing about frameworks. Like, do you remember
Yes,
when you were learning
oh
JavaScript
yeah.
and HTML and CSS and people would talk about frameworks and you'd be
I
like,
was like, what the
whoa, whoa,
fuck does
whoa,
that
whoa,
mean?
whoa, whoa,
Yeah.
whoa.
Whoa,
Hold
slow down,
hold
guy.
on. This JavaScript book is this thick. I'm
Yeah,
struggling with it. There's no way I can learn frameworks.
yes, I do
Oh, dude,
agree,
it's
and
so
I
it's also
understand
it's
that for
easy to
sure.
think too when you're first starting out and you hear about all these technologies and all these like frameworks and tools and stuff to just feel like there's no way I could ever like you must have to be a genius or someone special to be able to use this stuff because there's just too much information. But
Yeah,
it's totally not true. Like that's the funny part.
yeah, I think that's a good point, and we should talk a little bit about that because you guys are right. Like when you're sort of making that leap from the foundational languages of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript over to a framework, it can be very confusing. Of like, what do I need to learn? Which ones work best together? I mean, we talk about this a lot inside of the web dev incubator, which is, you know, it's not a perfect process of choosing a tech stack. And sometimes your choices don't work, right?
Yeah.
And so I know that can be a very confusing thing. I remember when we were in our boot camp and we started talking about React, and I was like, nobody even gave us a sort of explanation of what it meant.
No.
And I think that's one of the hardest parts to understand. And I guess maybe that's a good place for us to start, right? So, what is a framework? Like, what would you
Oh,
guys, how would you define that? Go ahead, Randall. Define
oh,
it
so
for
I
us.
like I like to think of frameworks as modern JavaScript. So
I
Mm,
like
like
that definition, yeah.
people talk about vanilla JavaScript, and that's
hmm
like old JavaScript. frameworks are modern JavaScript, and when I say modern, yes, it's newer, but it also just makes your job easier.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, at its
Well,
core, they really are just JavaScript, but there's a lot of stuff going on in the background that just makes it easier for us as developers.
I think the way to think about it too that's helpful is like when computers first came out, people had those punch cards they had to organize, and put in. Then they had to learn like machine language, right? And you had to be able to like write in that, which was really difficult because it's totally not human readable. So like
Yeah,
as times pass, we've kept coming out with better, more accessible ways or faster, these tools that can help us code better, faster, and
yeah,
understand what we're doing. And I think
Wh-
frameworks are an iteration of that where like it gets a lot of that, a lot of the bogged down weight of like all this crap you have to do, they take care of a lot of things for you and make it easier and make it possible to do a lot more. And like I think nowadays you have to know frameworks because like you
yeah.
just you'll
What
be
is that?
so
What is that
inefficient
saying?
otherwise.
Like we're standing on the shoulders of giants, something like
Yes.
that. Yeah,
Yes.
so
Hmm.
that's how I like to think of it, right? It's like there's a very common principle in software development of don't repeat yourself. And it's a more holistic thing too of like don't repeat what somebody else has already made. And so that's why we build these frameworks, right? There's other people who came before us, other great developers who've come before us and built these amazing frameworks that take away a lot of the complexity, a lot of the headaches of coding, and just make it easier. And so
Well, and like
one
the
of
guy, I just want to mention too, real quick, like
yeah,
the guy that started the conference the other day on Next was the guy that created it.
yeah,
And he pointed out two important things. One is that it's the most popular, right? React framework has like I think they said like 7.5 million downloads a week or something like that.
yeah,
But the other thing too is like, and you could see like he was interested in making things easier for developers,
hmm
faster, and that's what they're interested in. And I think they're
yeah,
built, and I think you got to remember they're built by people that code that had
yeah.
a problem and are solving that problem.
And so why do people want to do that? Why do they want to make it easier and faster?
I think because we
Yeah, it
like
doesn't make any
creating things,
sense.
right?
Yeah.
I just totally didn't understand. I was like, isn't stuff supposed to get harder and more complex and
Well,
more
I
yeah,
think it's because
aggravating?
I think we like creating things, and I think like the thing I think that really, I don't know, excited me about frameworks is like frameworks really make it possible for one person to be a dev team and be
yeah,
a full stack developer, like
exactly.
for
Like
real. Like,
it makes it easy to ship product like very quickly, right?
oh, dude, it would be so hard to make a full stack app on your own
Yeah,
with no frameworks. It would take forever. There'd just be
yeah.
so much work.
One of the things that I think about a lot when we're having this discussion is actually this happened, I think, this past Tuesday. We have some new members inside the web dev incubator. Welcome, guys. Welcome, Charles and Andrew, and Ivan as well. And what we were looking at, a lot of these people have sort of done what all of us have, which is get stuck in the tutorial hell, the basic fundamental HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and haven't dived, is that the word? Dived into
Dove,
Dove,
Doven. They haven't
woven,
doven into
divined.
divine, just
I
fallen.
think that's different. They haven't gotten into frameworks yet. And so what we did on Tuesday, because we have this code along call, is that we got to show them off like a little bit of what happens in a framework. And this, I think, is the most sort of mind-blowing part to people is that when you're coding in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you have 3 different files, which you're trying to mentally manage while also looking at them at the same time, seeing what code is associated with what code in your HTML and your CSS and then your JavaScript. And it gets very confusing. And when you scale that up to a large, complex application, it's nearly impossible to track changes and things that are going on and errors, right? Because you're trying to dig through 3 different files, check IDs and properties of different things. It's nearly impossible, right?
Three
And
different
so
files. It could be
it could be more,
way
yeah,
more than
yeah.
that. Yeah,
But
if
that's
it's a
just like
big
that's like the most basic app is like
yeah.
an HTML and a CSS and a JavaScript file, right? And so one of the most powerful things that I think, I really love when this happens, but when we're on these calls and you can see everybody's face
Yeah.
and you show them a concept and you can see their mind blowing in that moment, that's like powerful, right? That's somebody who's taking on the next level of becoming a developer. And so what I saw was Andrew was like, oh my God, this is mind
Yeah.
blowing, because now instead of 3 different files, you have one file, right? It's a JavaScript file. And inside of that, we have HTML, CSS, and JavaScript all in one place. And all of it can be handled in one place. So it's very easy to see what's going on. And that, I think, is one of the most monumental, like powerful pieces of a framework.
No,
My
that, and
opinion.
I think it also makes frameworks like are great too, because like most of them, like Next is a good example, right? When you create a new app, you get to choose features and they're auto create installed for you. Like Tailwind is automatically, right, configured, ready to go
Yeah.
for you. Like that kind of stuff that just takes these steps out, and they really make the dry principle possible, because like, with the component structure and all, you're not repeating yourself, but it makes it easier
Yeah.
to do that. Whereas like in the old stuff, it's not. And even like, I mean,
Yeah.
there's just so many things about them that are just better, I think, than vanilla. And there's a reason why people use it and why like it's the most popular, right? Because it works. And because
Yeah.
like, they're committed
No,
to
it's
it.
totally.
All
Dave,
right, so there's a question. Yeah,
oh,
there's a
I was gonna
question
say
that
that.
says, is it safe to say a framework is similar to a wrapper for an API?
I would say that's a good
It makes
analogy.
it easier for a
An
person to use it
analogy.
and adds more features.
An
Yeah,
analogy, yeah.
it's a great analogy. So like what David's saying here is a wrapper for an API is sort of like if we call, an API endpoint just in the normal way, we'd usually use like fetch or Axios or something like that to make a fetch request, right? And so what happens
Slow down
sometimes,
for some people who don't. So an API
an
is what?
application programming interface. So
And
it's
why would you use
basically,
it?
yeah, so it's basically a way for your web application to speak to something else out there on the internet, whether that's a server or like a server that you own or some other service that somebody else owns or
Yeah, I was thinking
database.
like they're like a service, right? To add features, to add
Yeah.
functionality to your projects that somebody else built that you can connect to very easily.
Yeah. So a lot of times what's happening is when a website loads up on your browser, you're getting some portion of code, but you may need more than what's just being served to you immediately. Like you think about an e-commerce site, right? Like think about the Best Buy website. Uh, there's probably 100,000 products on the Best Buy website. It wouldn't make sense to serve all the data for every single product to a customer when they first hit the homepage of Best Buy, right? That doesn't make sense. That would be a lot of data to load in. And it would take forever. Like you'd be loading on Best Buy
For
website
like
for
20
about
minutes.
20 minutes before you
Like
got
just
to
It
it,
would be
right?
like
another terabyte. Hang on.
1990s.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the page would be like,
Yep.
beep.
So instead of doing that, what we do is we sort of code split that application into what the person is seeing at that time, right? So when you go to, I don't know, like a MacBook Pro page, it's going to make a request to the server that holds all the data for that product and serve that in that moment. It's so fast that I think we take this for granted of like how fast API calls are and how fast we can actually move data around the internet. It's pretty mind
You
blowing,
know
but
what's fun? The first time I remember I put a website in production, I remember choosing like the CDN provider where it's located. And I was like, it
yeah,
is amazing when you think about it. Like this place can be far away and it's virtually instantaneous, and we don't
yeah,
even notice it. Like we don't even think about it, and it's kind
yeah,
of it's kind of impressive. Yeah.
it's
Anyway,
very
sorry.
impressive. Yeah. I mean, just think about this. We're on a Zoom call. We're all in different places, right?
Yeah.
You're not like in a house right next to me. And we have a live video feed, which is a lot of data. And it's so fast that we can have a regular conversation. There's not like a delay between what I say and what you hear. It's pretty much instantaneous. So it's pretty amazing. So anyway, we split applications into the data that that person needs on the particular page they're on. And that way you can have an e-commerce site that has 100,000 products and it doesn't take 20 minutes to load. So that's what an API is. It's basically like your browser is asking a server for data. It doesn't necessarily have to be that. It could be other things like, we have our web dev Kickstarter project. And inside of that, we're fetching Pokemon data from a third-party API, right? From the Poke API, which is we don't own that. We don't host that. Somebody else does, and we can get that data. You can also like provide data to some APIs to do a calculation or something like that and provide an answer back to
We
you.
should do a live stream on APIs one day, because like I think they are important, and
Yeah.
they're cool because with these frameworks now, I mean, web apps have become the way to do all software development pretty much nowadays. I mean, you can do anything and everything that way through a browser because browsers have gotten so powerful and because there's all these services out there. And if
Yeah,
you
it's
just quickly search APIs, you'll find, I mean, thousands. There's so many.
yeah.
And if you want to see this Pokemon API project where you create your own Pokedex, well, you could just scroll down in the Facebook page and there's a post about that, which will lead you to a YouTube video we made, which is the first video of the series. So you can see the entire project and get started coding it now to see
Yeah.
if coding an API with HTML, CSS, JavaScript is for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So to get back to David's answer too, or his question, so APIs, they ask for some data, and typically in raw JavaScript, we'll do a fetch request, which is just a way of making an API call, like asking for some data from some endpoint. And sometimes certain services like Stripe or different ones like OpenAI, they will create sort of like an API wrapper. They'll create a service, and it's basically like a JavaScript object that contains a bunch of methods that that's like what's underneath that you don't see, but it's an object with a bunch of methods on it that do these fetches for you. They're pre-written or whatever. So you can just say, like, instead of like writing out the entire fetch, you can just say like, get this data or whatever, right? And so in that way, yes, it's sort of like similar sort of thing, right? Where a JavaScript framework is wrapping a lot of the confusing stuff behind it's sort of like the Wizard of Oz, right? Like it's like behind the scenes, there's a bunch of confusing stuff going on that's making it work. And you don't necessarily need to know all that to be a great developer using Next.js. It's helpful, but you don't need to know it all, right? You don't need to understand every piece of what's happening behind the scenes in order for it to work really well. So yeah, I
You
would
just need to
say
follow the yellow brick road, which is also known as
exactly,
Next.js.
exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah. Um, yeah, so I want to get into like some of the new features if you guys have used Next.js before. If you haven't, just to throw this out there, there are some really great resources that I would recommend to start learning Next.js. There's nothing that's going to help you more than just doing it. Like you have to just start building in it, and you're going to run into bugs and you're going to learn how to fix them. But what I would recommend if you want to take that first step is if you go to the Next website, which is nextjs.org, they have there's some button that says like learn Next.js, and it's a tutorial that you can walk through where you're just building like a basic dashboard page. And it's really helpful because it shows you a lot of the cool features of using Next.js and handling routing and the basic things. I would go ahead.
I was gonna say that's the other thing. You just remind me, but like with these frameworks too, the other cool thing is like it gives you access to npm package manager too to use, so you can rely on other people's packages, software
Yeah.
packages too, to also add features to your app and not have to reinvent the wheel all the time. And like this is
Yeah.
another important thing, especially when you're developing on your own, right? I think these frameworks are essential not only for big companies to like do their work quickly and efficiently and to make websites fast, but also for individuals who are, you know, freelancing and stuff to actually be able to do work and do it efficiently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
I want to say
sometimes
this too.
wonder.
Sorry, real quick, David,
Oh,
I just want to say, like, there's no reason to say sorry. The whole point of these calls is that you guys can interact, and we're happy to answer questions. And there
Yeah.
is no planned direction for this, just so you know. We sort of just
We can
take
always
it
do
on
it
the
again.
fly. Yeah. So go ahead, Randall.
I was also wondering if we're going to get to a time when people just start out with learning Next or a framework and they just skip over the whole like HTML, CSS, JavaScript stuff. Because I mean, essentially, you can learn everything you need to know while you're learning
All in
Next.
You
one.
can. I
Yeah.
think having like a very basic understanding is helpful just because like you can read the code. You know what I mean? Like it's not,
Mhm.
it doesn't look like a bunch of gibberish. But I think beyond that, yeah, I think just getting into it as soon as possible is actually the
Yeah.
best move. I mean, we saw it with our own guys. Like the progress is just insane because it makes it
Yeah.
so much easier and it makes it
It
more
was funny. It
enjoyable.
was funny. The first week they were like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, no, absolutely not, can't do this." And then by like week 3, they were like, "Oh my God, this is the best thing
I'm
ever.
never
I'm never
coding
going
without it.
back."
Yeah.
But but
Yeah.
it makes it also because I think all of us love to create. And these things are tools that make it possible to create so much better, so much,
Yeah.
it's such as better. And that's one of the other things the guy said too, is like, he wants it to be a good developer experience. Because that's,
Yeah.
you're going to hate your job if you hate the tools you're using. And, you're
Yeah.
going to love it if you love them. So,
It's
I
the
want to,
shoddy carpenter that blames his tools.
yeah. I want to go back to what you had said, Randall, about, do you think people one day will sort of do like just start learning frameworks? And I think, yeah, I think we can do that today, right? I think a lot of people can, and a lot of people just get stuck in this idea of like, I have to master something. I mean, I take a lot of these action calls. If you guys are interested in the web dev incubator, we do like an action call where you'll just get on a call with me and we'll discuss where you are in your journey of becoming a developer and see if, uh, you know, this web dev incubator is right for you.
How does
But
someone get one of those action calls?
we'll throw a link down below, but if you want, you can just type in really big letters in the comments Next.js and we'll reach out to you. But I'll throw a calendar
Also,
link
there's a
down there as
pinned
well.
post
There you go.
where you can, with the link to the action calls, which is at the top of the Facebook feed for Code Noobs.
Yeah, there you go. And so what I see a lot of people do is like they feel like they have to reach this sort of hypothetical level of mastery of some technology before they can move on to something else. And
I
it's
thought
just
God
not,
level tier
I,
programming, God tier level
yeah.
programming was a prerequisite for frameworks.
yeah,
But I think all of us go through this though, and I think it's just natural because it's that imposter syndrome, that fear that you're gonna
yeah,
fail at some point, that you won't be smart enough, good enough. And so it's like this like way of like, in a way, it's a way of holding ourselves back, right? No, I have
yeah,
to master this before I move on. And so you never really move on because there's so much, like really, if you dig down in just JavaScript, there's so much that you could theoretically learn about JavaScript, but a lot of it you'll never use on a regular basis because JavaScript does a lot of things. It's like
yeah.
you don't need all of
Well,
it either.
I had this conversation with Charles, who's in the comments here. He's our newest member of the Web Dev Incubator. Welcome, Charles. So he brought up a really good point, and it was related to this, right? He was talking about how do I break through this sort of mindset of I need to know everything in order to like feel like I can call myself a developer. And I think a lot of people, number one, I think that's probably the largest mindset shift that helps developers is like going from I'm learning software development to I am a software developer. If you just start self-identifying like that, you're going to have a lot more success. But one of the things that, really came out of this conversation, which I thought was so cool, is that he sort of had this mindset of like, I have to learn a certain amount before I can go out and become a developer. And I was like, that's great. That I understand where you're coming from because I had that idea at 1.2. But one of the cool things about development is that it's never ending, right? So like there is no place to shoot for because there's never like software changes so fast. Our job is not to like get to a level, it's to continuously learn,
How
right?
many
It's
times has Next itself changed dramatically since we
a lot.
started using it? A
Yeah.
ton. I mean, like literally, they've made huge changes where we have to then go to documentation to figure out because we're like, whoa, what's this? Like when I start a new project, it's like it all looks different now. So what
Yeah.
changed? And I think that's you have to get comfortable with learning on the fly and with your own level of confidence, and that does come with time too.
Yeah. And speaking about that, I want to talk about these changes with Next.js. I'm just going to
Yeah.
briefly go over the list of changes and we can explain some of them. If you guys are curious about what any of them mean, just ask in the comments and I'm happy to explain them a little bit more. But you bring up a good point, and this is that, the first, the second and third of these bullet point lists are breaking changes, which means that if you're using Next 14 and you install Next 15, your code will break because of these changes. Now, just think about that for a second. Next.js changes frequently. In fact, during the conference, I thought it was hilarious because it's so true that they were talking about how literally as they're releasing this to the public, they have developers backstage fixing bugs in the code. Like he
Yeah.
literally
Yeah.
said that in the conference. He's like, we actually found a bug in the code and we had to fix it while we're actually doing this conference so that we can release it. And that's the thing is software is ever evolving. Like
Well,
it's
did you see
not
the
ever
Canary version?
stable.
the next iteration of 15 is already, you can already download the Canary version. Like I mean,
Yeah.
they're fast, and I think, but it's important to realize that because you're never going to succeed in this field if you're afraid of continuous learning. It's going to
Yeah.
be a part of what you're doing, and I think, but it's enjoyable too because there's always new stuff to explore.
Yeah. So let me read through some of these. If you guys have questions, either you guys or people in the comments, feel free to shout them out. But I'm going to go through them. There's about, I'd say 15 or so new ones. But so the first one is at next/code/mod CLI, which easily allows you to upgrade to the latest Next.js and React version. So it's just a CLI command that you can use to update. So if you're on Next 14, now you can be on Next 15. Now, remember, there's going to be breaking changes, though, if you're using some of these things already. The second one is async request APIs, which is a breaking one. So incremental step towards a simplified rendering and caching model. So it's basically how you can asynchronously load data from server-side components. The next one is caching semantics, also a breaking change. Fetch requests, get route handlers, and client navigations are no longer cached by default. So that's an interesting one. So by default, API calls used to be cached in Next.js, and now they're not. Now, this isn't like they just took away a feature. What they actually did was they added more functionality to it, which I think is cool. They changed it so now you can set
It gives you
directly
more
in,
control over the
yeah,
caching, yeah, and how it's being used so that you can actually optimize your projects more and
yeah,
make them
exactly. And
faster.
it's like right in the config, you can say like how many days, hours, or minutes you want to wait before the caching
Can I say one
happens.
thing real quick?
Yeah,
Yeah, I think it's important to realize too, like a lot of these changes too, you have to realize, like, even as a developer, right? A lot of them are not things that you might need right away. Because a lot of these
yeah,
are also like
yeah,
that feature, like the optimization stuff, a lot of that's for the enterprise level stuff where they're really trying to squeeze every extra bit of efficiency they can out of something. But it might not
yeah,
be necessary for a regular, like simple project or something. So it
yeah.
is important to keep that in mind.
It's a good point. I mean, I was talking to Anthony about this a little bit this week. He's one of our web dev incubator members too, and he's building a app for his locksmith business, which I think is going to be amazing once he launches that. But one of
It is
the
gonna be
one
cool.
of the things that we talked about was sort of caching, right? And so when you have maybe 100 customers using your web app, if 100 customers are making a lot of calls to your server, it's probably not going to increase your costs much at all, right? Because it's still under like these thresholds of like you're basically not getting charged for them. But once you scale up to 100,000 customers, and then each of those customers is making 1,000 API calls every minute or something or whatever, when you start shaving off those calls with things like caching and optimization, that's where it makes a lot of sense to do this and spend energy on that, because that's hundreds or thousands of dollars in API calls that you could be shaving off. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, for most people, like these things may not be that important, but it's important to know them, right? And know that these features are available too. So moving on, React 19 support. So support for React 19, React
Hydration errors.
compiler, and hydration error improvements. We've seen a lot of those recently in the group,
Yeah,
and
which
they're
are
confusing, right? They don't give you a lot of information, so they've improved on that, which I think is cool because it's
that
an
even
issue
happened
that,
during the conference. Remember the
yeah,
hydration error? Yeah.
yep. Turbo Pack Dev
This is
in a
cool.
stable version. So this is basically, if you've heard of Webpack, it's like the compiler for your code. So when we write in when we use a JavaScript framework, what we're actually doing is we're abstracting away from HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And when you actually go to launch your code, that has to be compiled back into those. And so you need a compiler. And typically we used like Webpack, and they've created TurboPack, which is basically provides performance and stability improvements. It's a whole heck of a lot faster.
It's
It's like
super fast. I mean, it's
probably,
definitely like
yeah,
gotta
I
two
be
to
saw an
three
50,
article
times
that said
faster.
between 40 and 90% faster.
which is
So
Yeah.
insane.
it's significant.
Yeah.
Yeah, huge. So very cool. And it does, he was talking about in a very soon version that they're going to launch, it does caching. So like
Yeah.
you can, if you do one build and then you do another build, it's only going to compile what the changes are. It's going to cache that, so it's even faster.
Real quick, when you're developing in Next, yeah, you have a development server that's running so that you can view your project while you're working. Simple, like using Live Server if you ever use that extension.
Yeah.
But it has to build it. So when you make a change, it recompiles and then you see the results. And the old Next was very quick at this, but this Turbo Pack, I mean, it just, like you said, I mean, it's
It blows it out
49%
of the
faster. It's
water.
insane.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so much faster. So that, like when you hit save, it's like almost instantaneous. You see your changes, and it's really helpful for development because, like they were talking about in the conference, huge projects. Sometimes those development builds can take a while, and that's a lot of wasted
Yeah.
time sitting there, right? Just waiting for
Especially
this
if you're
thing.
like checking that something's working, you
Oh
know?
God, yeah, yeah, it can take
Yeah.
forever, and then that slows down solving problems and errors and all. So yeah, it's a really
Yeah.
cool feature.
Yeah. Next one is static indicator. So it's a new visual indicator that shows static routes during development. That's pretty cool. So you know like which routes are dynamic, which ones are static without having to dig through your code. A new unstable after API. This is experimental and it basically allows you to execute code after a response finishes streaming. So, you know, you get some response and then you want to execute something on that response. You can do that. Instrumentation.js API, which is stable, is a new API for server lifecycle observability. Observability. All right. Enhanced forms, next/form. So this is like a new form component, which is I think is really cool.
It is
It
cool.
does a lot of what you would typically do in writing the code for a form in terms of like server side. Well, this is enhanced HTML forms with client side navigation. So it's basically just going to automatically put your search params in the URL string, which is pretty nice because then you can pull that into other components and things like that. Next.config, they have now TypeScript support for next.config.ts. Self-hosting improvements. So more control over cache control headers, server action security. I think you'll like this one, Randall. So basically, they're making unguessable endpoints and removal of unused actions. So server actions are basically a function that you can call. They're server only functions, so they don't expose API keys and things like that. And it creates, you know, an API or an API endpoint, which is just a URL. So before those were, you know, they followed some schematic sort of, and now they've changed them so they're unguessable. So you want to explain maybe why that's helpful for security reasons?
Yeah, so basically if you can guess the endpoint, like let's say you're going to a website and when you log on, you notice the URL says like $user equals 0
Yeah.
and it has you logged in. And then you're like, "Oh, that's interesting. I wonder what $user equals 1 is or $user equal 2." And so if you can guess what the endpoint is, you can potentially have access to accounts that you shouldn't have access to.
Yeah.
So this by doing this, it actually is really good because there's even some programs out there that will just basically brute force a whole bunch of endpoints and tell you if they are I forget what the term is, but basically
Like
if it
live.
is randomly, yeah, if it's randomly
Oh.
generated or if there's actually some type of pattern to it.
Mm.
And so yeah, I'm guessing what they've done is made them truly random and unique and unguessable at this point.
Yeah.
So that's going to
I
be definitely good for security.
I was reading into
Yeah.
that a little bit too, and it's kind of cool because what it does is when you create builds, it will periodically randomize them again. So even if you like every
Which is
time that
really
you
cool.
like change the app and rebuild it, it'll change those. So like, you know, if somebody comes across one at some point, it's probably going to disappear it, you know, at some point. So
And that's really good. That's like what they used to do in cryptography, where they had the one-time use notepads. So they would
mm,
have these notepads that they would encrypt something with, and then they would tear off that notepad and toss it and burn it, and then they would have a next one. And those are really good in terms of not being able to decrypt them because you only use a notepad once, and the way that they're doing it is only done once. So if somebody happens to crack that code, they can read that one message, and that's pretty much it. So if
yeah.
somebody could guess the endpoint, they would have it for that one build, and then they wouldn't have it in the future.
Yeah. I want to talk about that briefly a little bit more because I think this is a really interesting topic. I know we both got that book, Hacking APIs, and in the very
But that was a
beginning of
good
that,
book.
yeah, I guess you got it too, Danny. In the very beginning of that book, he was talking about, the author was talking about how, there you go, there it is. So he was talking about how APIs are really the most vulnerable part of modern web applications, because this is where the data is actually being passed back and forth. And we, sometimes think about the website as being, the what's the word for it? Like the vulnerable part of
The
a
security risk.
website. Yeah. But the reality is, because of what we just talked about with like the Best Buy application, there's so much data really being passed in and out of the application that if you can hack the API, right, which is just that communication layer between what the client is seeing and what the server has, then you have access to everything,
And not
right?
only that, but most modern web apps are using way more than one API. They're
Yeah,
using
totally.
many, and I think that's the other thing to keep in mind is it just gets, that always creates vulnerability when you have a
Yeah.
lot of things
So,
talking to each other.
yeah. And this is, again, goes back to why we use JavaScript frameworks, because I don't want to have to deal with creating unguessable endpoints. That sucks as a developer to deal with that stuff. So I can just use Next.js and rely on the team at Next.js who's focused on this to make it work for me. And I don't have to like do anything. It just
And who want to
works.
make a
Right.
good product. I mean, I think that's the
Yeah.
other important thing. Like they are committed to really developing this and making it as best as they can, which is awesome.
So
Yeah.
here's an interesting thing that they mention in the first chapter of that
Yeah.
hacking APIs book. So it talks about API hacks becoming pretty commonplace, and it says incidents like these have become so commonplace that the analyst firm Gardner has predicted that API breaches will become the most frequent attack vector by 2022. And IBM has reported that 2/3 of cloud breaches are a result of API misconfigurations.
Yeah. So,
So that's
uh,
huge because everybody
yeah,
uses cloud, and
totally.
2/3 of that is due to API misconfigurations. Not that there
Yeah.
was something vulnerable with the API, but just that the way that they set it up was not secure.
Yeah. And I would guarantee that probably only like 10% of developers out there know like surface level how to keep APIs secure, right?
Yeah.
So,
Well, because there's just so much to know. Like I'm not sure if you saw it recently, but Fireship just did a video about this Pokemon breach. They lost a terabyte of data because
I did not.
somebody took their configuration YAML file and did change mod 777, which changed the permissions so that everybody can read, write, and execute.
Oh
So
my
like
God.
if you know about dealing with permissions on Unix, there's very few files that you would ever want to have
That sort of
change
permission
mod
level.
777 to have give read, write, and execute permissions to everybody. But they did this by accident, probably because they were just, you know, they were under time pressure. Their boss was breathing down their neck. They said, get this done. They looked at some article, or maybe they prompted ChatGPT or something like that, and
Yep.
it just said, do this. They did this and they didn't realize the security ramifications. But it's like when it's stuff that's outside of your wheelhouse, it can be dangerous. And so there's so much
Yeah.
stuff going on, but the more that you learn about it, the more secure you can be.
Yeah. And I want to make a mention of this too, is if you guys are learning software development, it's very important to understand these at least basic concepts of cybersecurity. And that's why I'm so happy that Randall is with us, because he's able to be that sort of like, knowledge base of cybersecurity that people inside the web dev incubator get access to, and it can ask these sort of questions of like, why does this matter? What does this mean? Right. And we do a lot of talk about cybersecurity inside the program and understanding like what's keeping my app secure, how do I handle these different things. And so I just want to stress the point that as a developer, you are expected to understand at least some level of cybersecurity, because ultimately you are building the security of these apps that you're building. And when you go to work for a company, they're just expecting that you understand this stuff, at least at some level, because data is worth a lot nowadays. And these breaches aren't uncommon. Like they happen all the time. So we have to be aware of that stuff as a developer. Let me finish the last three of these, and then we can sort of finish up our discussion. If anybody has any questions,
Yeah.
feel free to throw them in the comments. So the last three are bundling external packages stable, so new config options for app and pages router, ESLint 9 support, so added support for ESLint 9, and development and build performance, so improved build times and faster fast refresh. And we talked about that with the new compiler, the Turbo Pack. So really cool improvements. If you guys want, I'll drop this in the comments. You can look at this list and see all of these things. You can actually dig into them. They have more information on any of them, so you can click into it and see what they all mean. And if you haven't tried out Next.js, this is your chance, right? This is your calling to try it out, to take that step and try something new, because this is the next big thing. Go ahead, Randall.
You mentioned the tutorial on the Next website, which is really good, a great way to start. Also, what was the name of that YouTube channel that has the Next tutorial? Because that's also a really good way.
There's a really good tutorial. The YouTube channel is called Code Evolution. It's like all one word. And he does a really great job. Just bear in mind that that's Next 14, but it covers 90% of everything you'll need to.
It's like 100 video playlists, so I don't think he's gonna do another one for Next 15 very soon.
I would also say, if you're just starting out though, just go to Nextjs and go to their website, and you'll find they have their own little like learn, which that you were talking about, that dashboard
it's
thing,
a
which is
button
great
on the homepage. It says learn Next.js.
They also have, if you're new to this too, they also have a basics or fundamentals of React course, which is good, just to understand how React works. And because one of the harder things we get in these frameworks is understanding abstraction, and we can talk about this more at another time.
And the beginning React course is good for people, even if you're just starting out with HTML and CSS, because what it actually does is it starts you out in an HTML document, and it has you write an HTML document, add some CSS, add some JavaScript, and then create a React document out of there. So it kind of takes you the whole way as if you're just starting.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's what, right back to your point of like, do you need to know everything about HTML, CSS? No, you need to know, like, honestly, I think you could get away with understanding a definition of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, having the documentation sitting next to you, and then just start with Next. Like, you literally could at this point get away with that.
You could get away with it. I think having a basic understanding helps, like very basic though. You could, I think moving on as fast as possible is a good idea, because there's just no reason to waste time.
And I like to say this too, is when you're building a custom web application, you can do anything. So I think people limit themselves a lot when they're learning HTML and CSS, and like, you know, maybe it's hard to know like what the actual property name is for like rounding the corners of a box or something like that. But you can make anything out of an application that you want, anything literally to the point of like, you can make 3D animations in a website now, right?
Anything's possible now, dude.
Anything is possible. So don't feel limited in like, I don't know the answer. That's why documentation is there, right? And so to your point is like, you can just understand what HTML is, what CSS is, what JavaScript is, what their roles are in web development. And then if you can understand how to read documentation and search online and implement AI, which is like the most powerful thing ever, you can build a Next.js application very easily without understanding anything, right? Like, you could walk into it without understanding. In fact, I've seen YouTube videos where people talk about like, I built this Next.js app without knowing a thing about coding, and they're just prompting AI and then checking that it works. I wouldn't recommend that, because it's important to understand what the hell is going on in your code. But it's possible, right?
So there's a specific AI for Next called V0 that'll do that for you.
And we have a video on that as well. So if you guys are interested in that, you can check out V0 by Vercel, which is like trained on the Next.js documentation. We have a video in the guide section. You can check it out.
We also have a couple videos on YouTube too.
Yeah, I made a YouTube video where I made 5 Next projects with V0 in 15 minutes. So,
incredible. Yeah.
If you need some projects to pad your resume,
there you go.
Check out that video.
In 15, if you have an interview coming up in 15 minutes, check it out. All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you are inside the Web Dev Incubator, we'll send you a link for the call, which is in 10 minutes. If you're curious, we have 2 products which are quite amazing.
I was gonna say, if you want to learn everything you need to know about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript so you can move on to frameworks fast, the Kickstarter course is perfect for you. And you build a lot of real projects. There's code alongs and a lot of instructional stuff. It covers everything. Yeah.
So if you're feeling like, I don't even know where to start, that is your starting point. Like, the Web Dev Kickstarter is designed for that. So that's a mini course. It's a one-time payment. Get access to it for life. Danny does some amazing like tutorials on how all these technologies work. And then at the very end, we build a Chrome extension, the Poke API Chrome extension, and you get hands-on experience with using these things as well. So I highly recommend that. Yeah, you can just go to codenoobs.io/courses. You can see the course there. And if you want a community, we have that as well. It's called the Web Dev Incubator. I know the names are a little confusing, but deal with it. The Kickstarter is a mini
I
course.
think they make sense. I don't know.
They do. They do. The incubator is an incubator. It's like where we help people sort of like flourish and find their place in
become
this
good
world.
developers.
Yeah, and become really good developers. And I talk about this a lot. It's not meant to be like spoon feeding you everything. There is course content in there that teaches you the basics, but the idea here is not, we're not a boot camp, right? We're not just forcing you down this cookie cutter path of learn this technology, then learn this one, then copy and paste this technology, then copy and paste this tech. No, we want you to actually develop your skills of becoming a developer, how to read documentation, how to solve problems, how to go out and talk to people and tell them that this is what you do and get them to pay you to do this stuff, right? So that is the purpose of this. It's a community that's supportive. It's all people who are extremely committed to this idea of becoming a web developer.
About tech. It's awesome.
Yeah. And we encourage each other. I was talking to my girlfriend about this last night, and I think it's so cool. There's like this almost like slightly competitive encouragement that you get, right? Because you're in this community and you see other people doing stuff and you're like, damn, I need to learn more. I need to practice more. I need to build more. I need to do this, right? It's great. It's an amazing thing to have because if you're just out there on your own trying to learn with any of these technologies like Code Academy or the Free Code Camp or Odin Project, they're great, but there's no feedback. You get no feedback. You don't know where you're going.
And you're not building,
and you don't have guidance.
Projects. Like that's the other
exactly.
thing, But
yeah, so if that interests you, we're happy to talk to you about it, give you more information. Just schedule a free action call with us. Throw Next.js in the comments. I'll reach out to you, or there's posts all over the group where you can schedule a free action call and we'll discuss that with you. There's no pressure. There's no, you can take the free action call and do what you want with it. There's no pressure to join. So with that, thank you guys for tuning in on another Saturday. If you are inside the Web Dev Incubator, we'll see you in about 15 minutes. Yeah, and enjoy your Saturday. Have a great day, and we'll see you next week.